Welcome to News in Context. I'm Gina Valeria. In this episode, we talk with Melissa Weintraub, founder and co-executive director of Resetting the Table. Resetting the Table focuses on building dialogue and deliberation across political divides, focusing on seemingly intractable differences that are breeding distrust, a lack of empathy, and marginalization. As part of their work, Resetting the Table produced the film Purple, which uncovers the humanity beneath our national conflicts. You can watch Purple and find out more information at resettingthetable.org/purple. This is Civity Week on News in Context. Civity features people who are building relationships to dismantle inequities and strengthen communities grounded in respect and empathy. Welcome, Melissa. Tell me about Resetting the Table. How did it come about and what are the goals?
So we work to strengthen democracy through collaborative deliberation across political silos in American life. We do intensive facilitation and convener training, dialogue, and decision-making forums on contentious issues and a host of other programs. We've brought more than 29,000 Americans together from a sweeping range of backgrounds and viewpoints, many of them clergy, campus professionals, journalists, others who act as societal conveners. That's our target audience, our primary target, people who are organically bringing together diverse constituencies, helping them to do that well and to build a culture of dialogue and deliberation in their communities and in their institutions. Our overall vision, our overall goal is to rebuild a shared sense of we in American life without papering over our differences. Supporting the recognition, care, insight, collaboration with our counterparts, particularly our political counterparts. That's our focus, and their humanity and aspirations and needs. And we see that as critical to violence prevention, restoration of social cohesion and social fabric in the U.S., creative problem solving, the capacity to move forward as a shared democracy, etc.
It's a lofty goal and it's hard. When you say bring the we back, how do we do that? How do we actually get at that challenge?
Yeah, this is a big problem to crack. There's a lot of root causes and variables to get at, from how media functions to geographic and ideological sorting, just all the ways that people are separate from people who are different than themselves in America today. And all of the problems that creates in terms of mutual incomprehension that becomes mutual vilification and dehumanization so often. So there's a lot of ways, and a lot of the work that we do, it was pre-COVID in person, and it was a lot about breaking open stuck patterns of communication and helping people into empathy and recognition for each other's lived experiences, for each other's moral and political lenses, just coming into those aha moments of how people actually see things. We were always frustrated with questions of scale. We reached about 5,000 people a year, and that kind of in-person programming that's now become virtual programming, which is why we have moved into content creation as well as training journalists to try to do work at a bigger scale that's changing, overcoming some of the perception gaps that we have of each other, these kinds of cartoonish caricatures that we have of our counterparts, changing some of the storylines that we have about each other, just restoring hope about who our counterparts are because of that vilification and dehumanization.
You talked about seeing examples of, oh, this isn't how I should view you at all. You're actually a living, breathing, full human.
Something I didn't say is our organizational origins were focused on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I can tell more of that story. But the launch of our work on U.S. Red, Blue, Purple and rural-urban divides took place in rural Wisconsin and Iowa, in the heart of the area that flipped in the 2016 election, Obama to Trump. Like, there were more counties that flipped there than anywhere else in the country. And we brought a team of 36 facilitators and interns with us to do a listening campaign and a whole series of dialogue forums there. So our interns were coming from schools, kind of deep blue enclaves, progressive bubble institutions like Oberlin and UC Berkeley and Brown. I think it's not an exaggeration to say that for many of them, the program was as much of a cultural exchange program as one taking place around the globe. One of them said something that's always stayed with me. She said, I feel like I've just been conditioned to only understand and relate to stereotypes of virtually all the perspectives I'm hearing, rather than the perspectives themselves and their own internal logic, let alone the human beings behind them. That kind of embodies the perception gaps that we bring with us. Just there's so much projection on virtually every issue, from abortion to guns to the role of government. There was a kind of awakening and just seeing the political landscape very differently from listening to people, which is something that we need to be trained to do, and then we need to be initiated into opportunities to do in America today, to understand where other people are coming from, rather than just project onto them our assumptions about where they're coming from.
Yeah. And you said earlier the idea that when we don't understand or when something feels unfamiliar, we might become uncomfortable with it and then vilify it. And so bringing people together face to face can really, I mean, it can be scary at first, but it can really help diffuse that tendency we have as humans. I mean, it's a human tendency. Oh, it's unfamiliar. I'm going to be cautious, and then I might go down a road that's not very healthy as far as how we engage.
Some of it is about this kind of rehumanization. Some of it is about people being seen as they wish to be seen, and the ways that is healing and is relieving. Often people just have breakthroughs of insight and ahas. We had a red-blue workshop earlier this week where several people who were coming from conservative standpoints realized that they didn't understand Black Lives Matter, that they had been kind of coming in with all of these assumptions of Black Lives Matter that were just false. And a lot of that was also fed by conservative media portrayals of the protest, which has its, dehumanization in a very mirror image way. And it just took creating an environment in which they felt like they were being seen as themselves, and so they could become less defensive and more receptive and overcome their own confirmation bias and motivated reasoning to take in new information and ideas. And, one of them said, I realized I had no idea what Black Lives Matter was coming into this, and you just taught me something. And then a few others typed in and said that they had a very similar experience. We aren't often explicitly pushing people toward collaboration, like actually working together to solve problems. Like, our work is about establishing the relationships and the communication and those kinds of insight breakthroughs that allow people to discover if they want to collaborate, and then we kind of hand them off to others. But a lot of collaborations emerge from the programs that we do. For example, we did a program, a Red Blue Divides workshop in Texas that included people who were working in municipal governments on different sides of various divides, and we had people who were working on the gun issue, coming at things from very different perspectives. They thought that they were diametrically opposed coming in. There was a lot of kind of, we're coming from, like, we are just going to clash and escalate if we actually talk about this. But what they realized when they went towards their differences and investigated them with support, which is the core part of our methodology, that they agreed about 98% of the picture. And there was a lot that they could do together on the gun issue, on gun policy and preventing gun violence, and that the 2% that they disagreed about was actually worth tackling and investigating because they were learning things from each other. So that's a very common kind of experience in the workshop version of what we do, that people realize, in part by going towards their differences non-avoidantly, fearlessly, with support, that they agree about far more than they thought they did, and they can work together, and they can take the part that they disagree on. They can simply learn from it or become partners in exploration around it.
These issues can seem intractable, and often there are emotions and strong-held notions that go along with them. So how do you build trust and connection when these elements exist?
I think that progressives tend to be a little startled by the way that conservatives experience this sense of embattlement and being shut down. It's really important to name and acknowledge that, particularly in the last 4 years, that so many progressives have felt just like completely threatened, under attack, like the populations that they care about, marginalized populations, like lives are at stake. This isn't just about politics. People's very identities and existences are at stake and are vulnerable and are being threatened. And so this isn't just a matter of debate or exchanging opinions. Like, there are real things at stake and basic rights are at stake. So I think when people are in that mindset, which is completely understandable, then when conservatives talk about like having relationships cut off and feeling like they're vilified, there's a kind of so be it, like you deserve it, or you're doing it to yourselves, and we have to be honest. And I don't care if like I'm shutting you down or I'm cutting off this relationship because you are participating in, like, you're shoring up systems that are threatening my life, my very life, and the lives of the people that I love and care about. And then there also is like a sense, I think, among progressives that people are having a kind of wanting to redirect attention or distract attention to themselves. Like they just don't want to give up power. And so they're talking about their own persecution. I think that there is a lot of ways that, blind spots are called blind spots for reasons. Hegemony is called hegemony for reasons. And I find that in today's America, despite everything that I've just said, which is really important to give recognition to, progressives are really not aware of their own hegemony over a lot of institutions of American life, like the degree to which the mainstream media and academia and the entertainment industry, just so many of the kind of cultural engines of American life and the intellectual engines of American life do disparage, mock, and demonize conservatives, and as well as just purple people and a lot of people who are in flyover country who don't identify with progressive politics, so-called flyover country in quotes. So all that is to say, like, there's a lot of work to do and kind of in every direction.
You just said something really interesting, the degree to which progressives have positions in the hegemonic structure. And I was thinking that is true to an extent, but I also was thinking, gosh, that's funny because people of color and women feel shut out from the narratives of the mainstream media or of Hollywood or of academe. Like, how difficult is it for a person of color to really get a tenure track position in academia? So I'm like, wow, there's actually potentially this point of connection where actually it's happening to both groups. Progressive group would think, oh, well, mainstream media is predominantly owned by conservative voices, but yet the conservative side would say, well, it's predominantly people who believe a certain thing that are on the air, who are talking, who are out in public. And I think there's a lot of fascinating conversation to be had in that space, because I think neither side accepts its piece of of ownership in that space.
There's been some studies that have shown that the groups that are most distrustful of mainstream media are conservatives, libertarians, Christians who are more right-leaning Christians, rural people, and people of color, essentially. It's like all of the groups that don't feel like, first of all, that they have representation in the newsroom, and that even if they have representation in the newsroom, that it's cosmetic representation, maybe it's tokenizing, but it doesn't actually impact the stories that are told, who's interviewed, and how they're heard, and that the stories of their communities are not actually given accurate representation. So that's what drove us into wanting to work with journalists, because there's for sure an intersection between communities of color and rural and conservative.
So let's talk about your work with journalists. I would love to hear more about how Resetting the Table is approaching this, and a little bit more about your work in the newsroom space.
I think journalism had a wake-up call in some ways after 2016, and I think this is to some extent reenacting now. Why were the polls so off? Maybe we're operating in a bubble. Maybe we don't know everything about what's happening in this country. We don't have our finger on the pulse of everything that's happening. If this was so shocking to us and came out of left field for us, we walked away from that experience. We thought, what if journalists could be societal mediators instead of fueling conflict? Like, journalists are positioned to be able to do exactly what mediators try to do, which is to capture disparate parties accurately on their own terms, to be able to give people accurate, empathic, generous representation, as opposed to spinning people as the worst possible version of themselves, to be able to crystallize and capture the fault lines and differences in America today. What are our national conflicts really about? What's underneath? Like, if our conflicts play out and they're kind of the soil, like, how could we get underneath that soil into what's really growing under? What are the motivations, the concerns, the humanity, the aspirations? What's underneath those conflicts as they're playing themselves out, as they escalate? What if journalists were doing that like mediators do? And that would change how we see each other, and it would help us to just be actually informed citizens in building a shared democracy, which is the role that we think the press could play. So that was our vision.
You're listening to News in Context. I'm Gina Valeria. We're talking with Melissa Weintraub, founder and co-executive director of Resetting the Table.
The very skills that we teach our facilitators which have to do with being able to excavate meaning, like what's really underneath what people are saying, being able to capture it accurately, being able to crystallize differences in a way that every party would say, yes, that's it. We thought, what if we could help journalists to do that better? That's the mirror that journalists should be holding up, so that people say, I understand all of the contentious issues. I understand what we're really fighting about. I understand what's at stake at them. I understand the people on the other side of those issues, and I'm not just seeing them as cartoonish caricatures.
What have you discovered?
Well, I'll say the successful piece, and then I'll say the challenging piece and what we've realized that we're up against. So the first training that we did was with the Solutions Journalism Network, and it was with a group of really prestigious journalists, Pulitzer Prize winners, et cetera. One of the things that we realized is that there is this kind of a growing field of community listening forums and such among journalists, but journalists have never actually been trained to listen. So some journalists they were gravitated to the profession because they were good listeners and they already had this skill set and this disposition. But mediators are trained to listen and work at it, build it as a muscle. And we train facilitators intensively for months, if not years, to be able to do something like listen to someone and then capture what they just said. And we would put before this room, and this was true in other rooms as well, an evangelical pastor saying something and say, what did he just say? And they had no idea what he had just said. Like they couldn't capture what he had just said without distortion and without incorporating all kinds of their own filter. They were editorializing in the process of just trying to capture like a very simple translation of what had just been said. So that's something that should just be part of training of journalists across the board. This is only one piece, but it's an important piece. There's really a systemic issue that most national media professionals are living in urban and liberal concentrated areas. As you see, this is one of the things that really drives me. I know that there's all kinds of representation issues, but we came to see through our work in the rest of the US that this was one of the major systemic issues. And that what happens is, because journalists are operating under a tremendous time pressure, because the business model rewards clickbait and anxiety-provoking headlines, and simultaneously they have no time to, as you were saying, to build relationships with sources before they need the source. They take all kinds of shortcuts, what we've come to see as drive-by journalism. This kind of paint by numbers approach that creates all this flattening. So what does that mean? It means they want to find someone who opposes government shutdown. They go to a shutdown protest and talk to the loudest person there because that's a shortcut. But how do I find that person? I haven't built relationships to be able to hear all the different reasons people might be critical about what's happening. So I go to a shutdown protest, or if I want to find someone who supports Trump, I go to a Trump rally. And then we get this kind of mindless, faceless mob that's standing behind Trump. That when there are so many nuances of why someone chose to pull the trigger for Trump. And then yet again, in this election, we have so many people saying, how could this be? And, how could close to 50% of our population have voted for Trump and having no idea the answer to that question? And journalists are just doing a tremendous disservice by not answering that question. And a lot of it has to do with how journalism is practiced because of the time pressures and like the lack of building real trusted relationships with a diversity of people who are coming at things with nuance and difference around those questions.
Yeah, and also I would say, in addition, yes, and the beat structure that used to exist, a lot of the corporate owners, because of the time and the resource pressures, the beats had to kind of get cut, and every journalist became a general assignment reporter. So those relationships that you would naturally build on a beat, you don't get to anymore, and you're just out covering the story, then that story, then this, and it is a pull here, pull there, get it on. A lot of journalists, myself included, you have to 3 stories a day done. It's great. I mean, I'm sure you've heard all of this, but you're right. That really is problematic when we're trying to inform the public, especially about issues that are so important to the very democracy. And then add to that this growing distrust, which is again feeding a horrible feedback loop, has led people to sources that are, absolutely not reputable, and yet they're speaking to the source in question, and that's really, really powerful. And so you're right. It's so important to be able to listen, as you say. And you brought up, I love your distinction, because it's true. Journalists listen. They're tenacious. They want to get the story. but they don't listen as a mediator listens. They listen in a different way. And that's really, really interesting distinction. I really love that. But this idea of, the fractures in our society and we only see them getting bigger. And I actually wanted to ask you, what did bring you here? How did your journey bring you to resetting the table?
I spent 25 years working on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Working on that conflict, I came to see how when huge factions come to see one another as like in their gut as other and enemy to the point that they say there's no talking to them, they can only be vanquished, they can only be squelched, and these kind of blanket generalizations about another people without really knowing who they are, that often breeds all kinds of harm and violence. In 2016, began to see those same trends essentially happening here and realize that we may be degenerating into that level of social conflict, that level of intractable social conflict and even violence, and that toolkit needed to be brought here. I'll say like more personally, I've always been a kind of dialogue fiend. Like dialogue has been my way of life from the time I was a small child. Like I grew up in a smallish town in the cornfields of central Illinois, very much red country, dominated by mega churches, and one of the only Jewish families in that town. Anti-Semitism was alive and well in my town and in my childhood. There were crosses put in our front yard and many people praying for my soul, but that in some ways placed my experience closer to that of earlier generations. A lot of people in my generation didn't have such visceral experiences of anti-Semitism growing up. People react differently to those kinds of experiences, but I reacted by kind of becoming the spokesperson for the Jewish people by default. Really, I think enjoying representing and connecting to people who didn't have other Jewish people in their lives and having them come to understand a lot about my story, my commitments, my people's history, etc. Also seeing the harms of not doing that, like how when people don't have those kinds of encounters that can transform them, both seeing the transformative potential of such human encounter and the harm that can ensue when people live in a vacuum of having such experiences and such encounters. I learned the importance of translation in engagement across difference and transformative, like the transformative potential of human encounter, essentially of human interaction across differences as ways of confronting any social ill, and how many of the issues and problems that we face come from people lacking empathy and care for what others are experiencing in relation to those issues, and just how important it is to build that empathy and care. That has driven, I think, my whole life's work. And I spent really all of my early adulthood and professional life doing various forms of dialogue and deliberation connected to social change. So initially, a lot of that work was in African American, Native American, and Latino communities. Then I got involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
I'm sure you know about all of this work. The studies on empathy, some of the studies I find most fascinating are that when we have empathy for our in-group, it can lead to lack of empathy for the out-group. So where do we go from here? What is the work that still needs to be done, and how is resetting the table going about tackling this work?
There's so much work that still needs to be done. I think we're at the beginning of a 40-year cycle, or like this will be the work of the next generation as well. We are very broken. The Democracy Funders Group just released this rubric of 3 different pillars of relating to the work that needs to be done around democracy building that I found really helpful. They talked about how there's the work of protecting democracy, and that looks like protecting voting rights and preventing political violence and electoral transparency. Then there's the work of rebuilding democracy, and a lot of the bridge building initiatives and dialogue work and electoral reforms, a lot of that fits into that pillar. And then there's the work of sustaining democracy, ultimately. That's about transforming the way media happens and national service programs that get people out of their ideological and geographic silos and political silos and racial silos, all of the above, to cross lots of lines of difference in American society. So a lot of what I'm thinking about now is this moment in American life reminds me a lot of the early 2000s in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where we were just first waiting for violence, and then the violence was happening, and there were all of these kinds of single stories about the other population that were vilifying and dehumanizing. All Palestinians are terrorists, all Israelis are military imperialists who want to just violate human rights and care for no one suffering but their own. Like these very damaging assumptions, and everyone kind of hungering for recognition of their own hopes and concerns and longings, like their national aspirations. And recognition is really at the heart of that conflict. And at the same time saying like they will never recognize my right to exist or the fundamental wrongs that they've committed. And this time reminds me so much of that time. And one of the things that I learned through working on that conflict is to show and not tell. The work that I ended up doing around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, instead of telling Israelis and American Jews, Palestinians aren't the demons you think they are, just bringing people on the bus to meet with Palestinian activists on the ground and to realize Palestinians are not the demons that you think they are. I don't have to tell you. If you meet with them and you stay overnight in their homes and you listen to their stories and you experience the policies that you support as they impact them, it's like that's going to change you. And so I think something really similar needs to happen in the US. Instead of saying they're not the demons you think they are, this is why we've turned to film and why we're trying to impact journalism, because there can be showing and not telling through film and through journalism if we get journalists on board with relating to their own others better.
Yes, so true. Certainly the Palestinians as the minority group without the power are being hurt. But I would also argue that the Israelis are being hurt too, because they're holding on to this feeling about feeling threatened or feeling negative about something. Whereas if we can communicate across these differences and divides and give each other humanity, we can let go of some of that and become whole again.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about is the heart of truth and reconciliation work on some level. Ultimately, there is an element of everyone has to confront their own history and their own complicity and their own implication to be able to be liberated. That it's not just the oppressed that needs to be liberated, but the oppressor as well. I will say that both in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and in terms of the political divides in the US, I think of it as more of a system of conflict than an oppressed or persecuted victim dynamic. Even though there's asymmetries of power, and it's important to recognize the asymmetries of power, there's also a system of conflict at play in which the very ways that each side kind of seeks to protect itself from the other and the way that it sees the other is exactly what perpetuates the worst behaviors. But like each side is inspiring the worst behaviors of the other in part through their perceptions of who the other is, which is precisely what's happening now in the US as well. And what happens in every conflict spiral. You know, my husband, who's also the co-founder of Resetting the Table, has worked in criminal court. And these are the dynamics that happen in criminal court too. You talk to one person and the other person seems like they're utterly vile and monstrous. And then you talk to that person and an entirely different story emerges. And each side kind of justifies their own worst behavior in the name of self-protection because of who the other is. And that's what has happened in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I see that happening in the US as well.
Thank you to my guest, Melissa Weintraub, founder and co-executive director of Resetting the Table. To learn more about Resetting the Table and to view the film Purple, which uncovers the humanity beneath our national conflicts, go to resettingthetable.org/purple. This is Civity Week on News in Context. Civity features people who are building relationships to dismantle inequities and strengthen communities grounded in respect and empathy. Music in this episode includes Spring Fling by Track Tribe and The Heist by Silent Partner. In addition to hearing News in Context every Friday at 8:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. on KSFP 102.5 in San Francisco, you can hear it on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, iHeartMedia, Google Play, Google Podcasts, Podbean, YouTube, and PRX. We're also on Facebook and Twitter at News in Context SF and on Instagram at News in Context. And you can find links to all of that at newsincontext.net. I'm Gina Valeria. Thank you for listening.